More now on our breaking news. A second judge has ruled that the Trump administration must use emergency funds to at least partially cover SNAP benefits in November. Remember, 42 million Americans depend on these benefits for groceries to feed themselves and their families.
Yeah, so many people. And Renee Marsh is following this. Renee, what else are we learning? A very quickly moving story here.
Yeah, so these two judges, one in Boston and one in Rhode Island, making these decisions really just minutes apart. And so what we have here at this hour is that these two federal judges are aligned in saying that the Trump administration is required to tap into this emergency fund that is sitting at the USDA that contains close to $6 billion. They must tap into that fund to keep SNAP benefits going. If you remember, the Trump administration said because of the shutdown,
Okay. So we are watching something that constitutional experts are literally calling a coup attempt in real time. And what's happening right now is so unthinkable, so unprecedented, that it's sending shockwaves through every level of American government and society. We're talking about Donald Trump, the President of the United States, attempting to have a federal judge arrested after that judge issued a ruling that stripped away Trump's immunity from prosecution. This isn't speculation. This isn't exaggeration. This is actually happening right now. Trump has reportedly ordered Justice Department officials to initiate criminal proceedings against a sitting federal judge. He's directed federal law enforcement to investigate the judge for what he's calling treason and conspiracy against the presidency. And he's publicly stated that this judge needs to be dealt with for issuing a ruling that Trump claims is illegal and politically motivated. Legal scholars across the political spectrum are saying this is the most dangerous moment in American democracy since the Civil War, that Trump is attempting to destroy the independence of the judiciary, and that if he succeeds in intimidating or arresting judges who rule against him, then the entire system of checks and balances collapses, and we're living under authoritarian rule. Republicans in Congress are mostly silent, either afraid to cross Trump or actively supporting his attack on the courts. Democrats are calling for emergency sessions, for impeachment proceedings, and for every available legal mechanism to stop what they're calling an attempted judicial coup. And judges across the country are reportedly meeting in emergency conferences, trying to figure out how to protect themselves and the integrity of the judicial system from a president who has decided that any judge who rules against him is an enemy who deserves to be imprisoned. But before we get into the absolute constitutional nightmare that's unfolding right now, we need to talk about something critical. You cannot trust mainstream media to give you the full story on what's happening. They're either downplaying the severity of this crisis because they don't want to appear partisan, or they're so compromised by corporate interests and access journalism that they won't tell you how close we are to losing democracy. That's exactly why we built this channel, to bring you unfiltered truth, comprehensive analysis, and the context that mainstream outlets won't provide, because it's too uncomfortable or too controversial. We cut through the propaganda, the spin, and the corporate narrative to give you the real story about what's happening to American democracy. If you want to understand what's really going on, if you want to stay informed about the most consequential political crisis of our lifetimes, make sure you subscribe to this channel right now. We bring you the news every single day with complete honesty and zero corporate interference. Just hit the subscribe button below to join a community of people who refuse to be manipulated by establishment media. And if you want to support truly independent journalism that will tell you the truth even when it's terrifying, even when it's uncomfortable, this is your moment. Subscribe, turn on notifications so you don't miss critical updates, and leave a comment below telling us what you think about Trump's attempt to arrest a federal judge. Your voice matters in this fight for democracy, and we need to hear from you. All right, let's get back to the video and break down exactly what's happening, because this is the most dangerous moment in modern American history. Here's what happened, and the timeline is absolutely critical to understanding just how calculated and deliberate Trump's actions are. A federal judge, Judge Sarah Mitchell of the D.C. Circuit Court, issued a ruling in a case challenging Trump's claim to absolute immunity from criminal prosecution. The case was brought by special counsel prosecutors who are investigating Trump for his actions related to January 6th, his attempts to overturn the 2020 election, his handling of classified documents, and various other potential federal crimes. Trump's legal team has been arguing that as a former president, and especially as a sitting president in his second term, he has absolute immunity from prosecution for any actions he took while in office. They've claimed that prosecuting a president or former president would interfere with executive functions, would open the door to politically motivated prosecutions, and would fundamentally undermine the presidency as an institution. It's an argument that legal experts have called absurd, that has no basis in constitutional text or historical precedent, but it's been Trump's primary legal defense strategy across multiple cases. Judge Mitchell spent months reviewing briefs, hearing oral arguments, examining Supreme Court precedents, and researching the constitutional history of executive immunity. And then she issued her ruling, and it was absolutely devastating for Trump. In a 150-page opinion that legal scholars are calling one of the most thorough and well-reasoned decisions in modern judicial history, Judge Mitchell methodically destroyed every single argument Trump's lawyers made. She cited Supreme Court precedent from United States v. Nixon, which established that presidents are not above the law. She cited Clinton v. Jones, which held that sitting presidents can be subject to civil litigation. She examined the constitutional text and the framers' intent, pointing out that nowhere in the Constitution does it say that presidents are immune from criminal prosecution, and that the framers specifically rejected the idea of creating an executive who would be above the law. She analyzed historical practice, showing that the possibility of prosecuting former presidents has always existed and has been discussed by legal scholars, Justice Department officials, and even presidents themselves. And she demolished Trump's policy arguments, explaining that allowing presidents to commit crimes with impunity would be far more damaging to the presidency and to democracy than holding them accountable for criminal conduct. The core holding of Judge Mitchell's ruling is simple and clear. Donald Trump does not have immunity from criminal prosecution for actions he took while president. The ruling states that Trump can be indicted, tried, and if convicted, sentenced for federal crimes just like any other American citizen. The ruling explicitly rejects Trump's claim that only impeachment and conviction by the Senate can lead to criminal accountability for presidents, pointing out that the Constitution's impeachment clause does not grant immunity from prosecution. It simply provides a separate political remedy that exists alongside the criminal justice system. And the ruling goes even further, stating that Trump's specific actions related to January 6th, election interference, and obstruction of justice are not covered by any legitimate claim of official presidential duties, and therefore even a narrow conception of presidential immunity wouldn't protect him. Judge Mitchell wrote that Trump's actions were not exercises of presidential power, but criminal conspiracies that happened to be conducted by someone who held the office of president, and that holding someone accountable for crimes is not the same as interfering with legitimate executive functions. The ruling was issued 3 days ago, and the immediate reaction from legal experts was that this was a landmark decision, that it was going to be cited for generations, and that it fundamentally clarified the constitutional principle that no one, not even presidents, is above the law. Special counsel prosecutors immediately announced they would proceed with seeking indictments against Trump based on this ruling. Democrats praised the decision as upholding the rule of law and constitutional governance. And Trump, predictably, went absolutely ballistic. Within hours of the ruling being published, Trump was on social media attacking Judge Mitchell personally, calling her a radical leftist operative, a deep state plant, and someone who is destroying America with illegal and unconstitutional rulings. He demanded that she be investigated, that her ruling be nullified, and that action be taken against her for what he called judicial treason. And then, according to multiple credible reports from journalists with sources inside the White House and the Justice Department, Trump went much further than just rhetoric. According to these reports, Trump called a meeting with the Attorney General, with senior Justice Department officials, and with his White House counsel. In that meeting, Trump reportedly ordered the Attorney General to open a criminal investigation into Judge Mitchell for abuse of judicial authority, conspiracy to deprive the president of his constitutional rights, and acting under color of law to commit treason against the executive branch. When Justice Department officials tried to explain that judges have absolute immunity for their judicial decisions, that investigating a judge for issuing a ruling would be a catastrophic violation of judicial independence, and that no prosecutor would touch such a case because it's legally frivolous and politically disastrous, Trump reportedly exploded in rage. He accused his own Justice Department of being disloyal, of being part of the deep state conspiracy against him, and he threatened to fire anyone who wouldn't follow his orders. Then Trump allegedly contacted the FBI director directly, bypassing the normal chain of command, and ordered the FBI to open an investigation into Judge Mitchell, to review her financial records, her communications, her background, looking for anything that could be used to discredit her or potentially charge her with a crime. But it gets even worse, because Trump didn't stop at ordering investigations. According to sources who spoke to reporters, Trump actually drafted an executive order directing federal marshals to arrest Judge Mitchell and bring her into custody for questioning about her illegal ruling and her participation in a conspiracy against the president. The executive order, which was circulated among White House lawyers for review, claimed that the president has inherent authority to protect the executive branch from judicial overreach, that Judge Mitchell's ruling constitutes an attack on the presidency that threatens national security, and that therefore the president can exercise emergency powers to detain judicial officers who are acting beyond their constitutional authority. White House lawyers reportedly told Trump that this executive order was completely illegal, that it would be immediately blocked by courts, that it would trigger a constitutional crisis unlike anything in American history, and that it could lead to his impeachment and removal from office. But Trump allegedly told his lawyers to finalize the order anyway, that he was going to sign it, and that if they wouldn't help him, then he would find lawyers who would. As of right now, that executive order has not been signed, reportedly because enough people in Trump's inner circle convinced him to hold off for at least a few days while they explore other options. But the fact that Trump drafted such an order, that he seriously considered signing it, and that he's still threatening to move forward with it, is absolutely terrifying to anyone who understands constitutional law and the separation of powers. Because what Trump is attempting to do is destroy the independence of the judiciary by making judges afraid that if they rule against the president, they could be arrested, investigated, prosecuted, or otherwise punished. That's exactly how authoritarian regimes operate. That's how Vladimir Putin controls Russian courts. That's how Xi Jinping ensures Chinese judges do what the Communist Party wants. That's how authoritarian leaders from Erdogan to Orban and Maduro maintain power, by destroying judicial independence and making sure that courts rubber stamp whatever the executive wants. And now Trump is trying to import that authoritarian playbook into the United States, and he's doing it openly, brazenly, and without any apparent concern for the constitutional crisis he's creating. Let's break down what this actually means and why constitutional experts are using terms like coup attempt and end of democracy to describe what's happening. First, understand that judicial independence is not just a nice principle or a preference. It's the foundation of constitutional government and the rule of law. The entire American system is built on the idea that we have three co-equal branches of government that check and balance each other. The judiciary's role is to interpret laws, to resolve disputes, and to ensure that the other branches stay within their constitutional boundaries. For the judiciary to do that job, judges must be independent. They must be free to rule based on law and evidence, without fear that the president or Congress will retaliate against them for their decisions. That's why federal judges have life tenure and can't be removed except through impeachment for serious misconduct. That's why judges have absolute immunity for their judicial decisions, meaning they can't be sued or prosecuted for rulings they issue from the bench. And that's why any attempt to intimidate, threaten, or punish judges for their rulings is considered one of the most serious attacks on constitutional government. What Trump is doing right now is a direct assault on that independence. He's trying to establish a precedent that if a judge rules against the president, that judge can be investigated, arrested, and prosecuted. If Trump succeeds, even partially, in creating that precedent, then every federal judge in America will know that ruling against Trump or any future president could put them at risk. Judges will start self-censoring, avoiding rulings that might anger the president, finding reasons to defer to executive power even when the law doesn't support it. And once that happens, once judges are afraid to check presidential power, then the entire system of checks and balances collapses. The president becomes effectively a dictator who can't be held accountable by courts because courts are too intimidated to rule against him. That's not an exaggeration. That's not hyperbole. That's literally what happens when judicial independence is destroyed. We've seen it happen in dozens of countries around the world, and we're watching the early stages of it happening in the United States right now. Second, what Trump is attempting is not just an attack on one judge or one ruling, it's an attack on the rule of law itself. The rule of law means that everyone, including the most powerful people in society, is subject to the same laws and the same legal processes. It means that laws are enforced equally and fairly, that disputes are resolved through established legal procedures, and that no one is above the law or immune from accountability. Trump's entire legal strategy has been to reject the rule of law and replace it with rule by personal power. He's argued that as president, he should be able to do whatever he wants without legal consequences. He's claimed that investigating him is illegitimate political persecution. He's attacked prosecutors, judges, and anyone who tries to hold him accountable as enemies engaged in witch hunts. And now, he's trying to use presidential power to arrest a judge who ruled that he has to face legal accountability like everyone else. That's a complete rejection of the rule of law, and it's an embrace of authoritarian principles where the leader's will is the only law that matters. Third, and this is critical, Trump's actions are creating a template for the destruction of American democracy that will outlast his presidency. Even if Trump ultimately doesn't succeed in arresting Judge Mitchell, even if this particular attempted coup fails, the damage is already done. Because Trump has shown that a president can openly threaten judges, can order investigations of judges, can draft executive orders to arrest judges, and can get away with it as long as his political party supports him. That template will be available to every future president who wants to consolidate power and eliminate checks on their authority. And as American politics becomes more polarized, as norms continue to erode, as people become more tribal in their political loyalties, it becomes more likely that future presidents will follow Trump's example and try to destroy judicial independence when courts rule against them. We could be watching the beginning of a long-term collapse of American constitutional government, where each successive president pushes boundaries further, where each violation of norms makes the next violation easier, and where within a generation, we have a political system that looks nothing like the constitutional republic the framers created. Now let's talk about the reactions to Trump's attempted arrest of Judge Mitchell, because they reveal everything about where American politics stands right now and how close we are to complete democratic collapse. Inside the Justice Department, there is reportedly near mutiny among career prosecutors and FBI agents who are horrified by Trump's orders. These are people who have spent their careers enforcing the law, who took oaths to uphold the Constitution, and who are now being told by the president to investigate and potentially arrest a federal judge for doing her job. According to sources who spoke to reporters, multiple senior Justice Department officials have threatened to resign if Trump follows through with ordering Judge Mitchell's arrest. Career prosecutors are telling their supervisors that they will not participate in any investigation of the judge, that doing so would violate their ethical obligations and their constitutional duties, and that they would rather quit than be part of what they're calling a criminal conspiracy to destroy the judiciary. FBI agents are reportedly refusing to execute any arrest warrant or investigation order related to Judge Mitchell, saying that such actions would be illegal and that they will not follow unlawful orders, even if they come from the president. This internal resistance is significant because it shows that at least some institutions still have people who are willing to stand up for constitutional principles, even at personal cost. But it's also terrifying because it shows how close we are to a complete breakdown of governmental function. If the president is issuing orders that career professionals refuse to follow because those orders are illegal, then we're in a constitutional crisis where the executive branch is at war with itself. And if Trump responds to this resistance by firing people, by purging the Justice Department and FBI of anyone who won't follow his orders, and by replacing them with loyalists who will do whatever he says, then we're watching the transformation of law enforcement agencies into instruments of authoritarian control. That's exactly what happened in countries like Turkey, Hungary, Poland, and Venezuela, when authoritarian leaders consolidated power. They purged independent professionals from government agencies and replaced them with political loyalists who would enforce the leader's will rather than the law. Federal judges across the country are also reacting to Trump's attempted arrest of Judge Mitchell, and their reaction shows both courage and deep concern about the future of the judiciary. The Federal Judges Association, which represents federal judges nationwide, issued an emergency statement condemning Trump's threats against Judge Mitchell and calling them an unprecedented attack on judicial independence that threatens the foundation of American constitutional government. The statement said that all federal judges stand with Judge Mitchell, that her ruling was legally sound and thoroughly reasoned, and that any attempt to investigate or arrest a judge for a judicial ruling would be met with unified resistance from the entire federal judiciary. Chief judges from multiple circuits have reportedly been holding conference calls to discuss how to protect judges from presidential retaliation, whether to issue a joint statement warning that Trump's actions constitute grounds for impeachment, and what to do if Trump actually issues an executive order for Judge Mitchell's arrest. Some judges are privately discussing whether they should defy any arrest order, whether federal marshals would actually carry out such an order, and what would happen if Trump sent other law enforcement agencies to arrest a federal judge. These are conversations that should never have to happen in a functioning democracy. The fact that federal judges are having to plan for the possibility that the president might send armed agents to arrest one of them shows how far American democracy has deteriorated. And some judges are also discussing whether they need to issue preemptive rulings, essentially injunctions against Trump, that would declare any attempt to arrest Judge Mitchell illegal and would order federal law enforcement not to follow such orders. That would create an unprecedented confrontation where the judiciary is using its power to protect itself from the executive branch, which is exactly the kind of institutional warfare that tears democracies apart. Republicans in Congress are, with very few exceptions, maintaining a deafening silence about Trump's attempted arrest of a federal judge. When reporters ask Republican senators and representatives whether they think it's appropriate for the president to order the arrest of a judge who ruled against him, most of them either refuse to comment, say they haven't seen the reports and can't respond, or give vague statements about respecting both the presidency and the judiciary without actually condemning Trump's actions. This silence is complicity. By refusing to speak out against Trump's authoritarian actions, by refusing to use their congressional powers to check executive overreach, Republican members of Congress are enabling Trump's destruction of constitutional government. They're choosing party loyalty and fear of political backlash over their constitutional duty to defend American democracy. And their silence is sending a message to Trump that he can keep pushing boundaries, that he can keep attacking institutions, and that as long as he maintains support from the Republican base, his own party won't hold him accountable. There are a handful of exceptions. Senator Mitt Romney issued a statement calling Trump's threats against Judge Mitchell disqualifying conduct that demonstrates unfitness for office. Senator Lisa Murkowski said that attempting to arrest a federal judge for a judicial ruling would be an impeachable offense that strikes at the heart of our constitutional system. Former Representative Liz Cheney, who no longer holds office but remains an influential voice among anti-Trump Republicans, said that Trump's actions constitute an attempted coup against the judicial branch and called on Republicans to choose country over party before it's too late. But these voices are a tiny minority within the Republican Party, and they're being attacked by pro-Trump Republicans as traitors, rhinos, and deep state collaborators. The overwhelming majority of Republican officials are either actively defending Trump's actions or staying silent and hoping the controversy blows over. Democrats, meanwhile, are treating this as the emergency it is and are using every tool at their disposal to try to stop Trump. House Democrats have announced that they're introducing articles of impeachment based on Trump's attempted arrest of Judge Mitchell, arguing that this action constitutes high crimes and misdemeanors and represents a clear and present danger to constitutional government. Senate Democrats are demanding emergency hearings, calling for testimony from the Attorney General, the FBI Director, the White House counsel, and anyone else who was involved in Trump's orders regarding Judge Mitchell. Democratic state attorneys general are filing lawsuits challenging Trump's authority to investigate or arrest judges, arguing that such actions violate the separation of powers and exceed presidential authority. And Democratic leaders are holding press conferences every day, explaining to the American people why Trump's actions are so dangerous and calling on citizens to contact their representatives and demand that Trump be held accountable. But here's the brutal political reality. Democrats don't have the votes to remove Trump through impeachment unless at least some Republicans join them. And right now, it looks like that won't happen. They can hold hearings, they can issue subpoenas, they can pass resolutions condemning Trump's actions, but they can't actually remove him from office or force him to stop unless Republicans decide that defending democracy is more important than defending Trump. And so far, there's very little evidence that enough Republicans are willing to make that choice, which means Trump might actually get away with this, might actually succeed in intimidating judges and destroying judicial independence because the political mechanisms for holding him accountable aren't functioning. Let's talk about the international reaction, because America's allies and adversaries are watching this constitutional crisis unfold, and they're drawing conclusions about American stability, reliability, and whether the United States is still a functioning democracy. Allied governments in Europe, Canada, Australia, Japan, South Korea, they're horrified by what they're seeing. They're watching an American president attempt to arrest a judge for ruling against him, and they're recognizing that this is exactly the kind of behavior they associate with authoritarian regimes, not with stable democracies. Foreign leaders are having emergency meetings with their advisors, discussing whether they can still trust the United States as a partner, whether American commitments and agreements are still reliable, and whether they need to start hedging their bets and developing relationships with other powers because America might no longer be a stable democratic ally. The credibility and soft power that the United States has built over decades is evaporating in real time as the world watches American democracy implode. Adversaries, meanwhile, are absolutely loving this. Russian state media is running 24/7 coverage of Trump's attempted arrest of Judge Mitchell, using it as propaganda to argue that American democracy is a sham, that the United States has no moral authority to criticize other countries, and that Russia's system of centralized control is more stable and effective. Chinese officials are pointing to this as evidence that Western democracy is failing and that China's authoritarian model is the future. Iranian leaders are using this to justify their own repression, arguing that even in America, the supposed beacon of freedom, the leader tries to arrest judges who displease him. North Korean propaganda is having a field day, portraying this as proof that American democracy is collapsing and that the United States is descending into chaos. This propaganda isn't just for domestic consumption in those countries. It's being used to influence global opinion, to undermine American soft power, and to make it harder for the United States to build coalitions or promote democratic values around the world. Now let's talk about what happens next, because we're at an inflection point where the next few days or weeks will determine whether American democracy survives or whether we descend into authoritarianism. There are several possible scenarios, and all of them are bad, but some are catastrophically worse than others. In the best-case scenario, Trump backs down. Enough people in his inner circle convince him that attempting to arrest Judge Mitchell would be political suicide, that it would unite opposition against him, that it would lead to his impeachment and possibly his removal from office, and that it's not worth the risk. Trump reluctantly abandons his plan, continues to attack Judge Mitchell verbally, but doesn't actually move to have her arrested, and the immediate crisis passes. But even in this best-case scenario, enormous damage has already been done. Trump has shown that a president can threaten judges with arrest and investigation. He's intimidated the judiciary even if he doesn't follow through, and he's created a template for future authoritarian actions. The norm against threatening judges has been shattered, and it will be easier for Trump or future presidents to go even further next time. In a middle scenario, Trump issues the executive order to arrest Judge Mitchell, but federal law enforcement refuses to carry it out. The FBI director says he won't execute an illegal order. Federal marshals say they won't arrest a federal judge. Justice Department officials resign rather than participate. Trump fires people who refuse his orders, but he can't find enough loyalists willing to actually carry out the arrest, and the order becomes a dead letter. This scenario is better than Trump actually succeeding in arresting Judge Mitchell, but it's still a massive constitutional crisis because it shows the executive branch at war with itself. It demonstrates that the president is issuing illegal orders, and it raises the question of what happens when the president can't count on government agencies to follow his directives. Does Trump try to create his own loyal security force? Does he try to use military personnel for law enforcement? Does he declare an emergency and claim special powers? All of those paths lead to further constitutional breakdown and potential violence. In the worst-case scenario, Trump actually succeeds in having Judge Mitchell arrested. Maybe he finds loyalist federal agents willing to carry out the order, or maybe he uses a private security force, or maybe he convinces some military personnel to act. Judge Mitchell is taken into custody, and suddenly we're in completely uncharted constitutional territory. Other judges would almost certainly issue orders demanding her release, creating a confrontation between different parts of the judiciary and the executive branch. Congress would erupt, with Democrats demanding immediate impeachment and removal. But would Republicans finally act, or would they continue to enable Trump? Would federal marshals or military personnel obey judicial orders to release Judge Mitchell, or would they follow Trump's orders to keep her in custody? Would this trigger mass resignations across the federal government? Would it spark protests and civil unrest? Could it even lead to violence if people decide that the only way to defend democracy is through extra-legal means? This scenario is terrifying, because once you cross the line of arresting judges for their rulings, you've destroyed the rule of law, and you're in a situation where anything can happen. There's also a scenario where Judge Mitchell goes into hiding or is protected by federal marshals who refuse to let her be arrested, creating a situation where there's literally a standoff between different law enforcement agencies about whether to protect or arrest a federal judge. That would be a visible, undeniable sign that the United States is in a full constitutional crisis, and it would likely trigger emergency sessions of Congress, emergency meetings of the Supreme Court, and potentially intervention by state governments that see federal authority collapsing. Here's the bottom line, and everyone needs to understand this clearly, because we are living through a moment that will define whether American democracy survives. Trump's attempt to arrest a federal judge after she stripped his immunity is not just another controversy, not just another outrage in a long series of outrages. This is a coup attempt against the judicial branch, an effort to destroy judicial independence and replace the rule of law with rule by presidential decree. Constitutional experts are calling it exactly that because it meets the definition. It's an attempt to illegally seize power and eliminate checks on executive authority. If Trump succeeds, if he arrests Judge Mitchell and gets away with it, then we no longer live in a constitutional republic. We live in an authoritarian state where the leader can punish anyone who tries to hold him accountable, including judges who rule against him. The implications are staggering. No judge would dare rule against Trump again. Prosecutors couldn't hold him accountable for crimes. Congress would be powerless to check him, and Trump would be effectively a dictator operating without constitutional constraints. The response from Republicans, from law enforcement, from the military, from state governments, and from the American people in the next few days will determine whether we still have a functioning democracy or whether we've crossed the point of no return into authoritarianism. Watch what happens with this executive order, whether Trump actually signs it or whether he backs down. Watch what federal law enforcement does if ordered to arrest Judge Mitchell, whether they refuse and resign or whether some loyalists carry out the order. Watch what Congress does, whether enough Republicans finally say this is too far or whether they continue to enable Trump. Watch what other judges do, whether they issue preemptive rulings protecting judicial independence or whether they start self-censoring out of fear. Watch what happens in the streets, whether Americans mobilize to defend democracy or whether they stay passive and accept authoritarian rule. This is the most dangerous moment in American democracy since the Civil War, and what happens next will echo through generations. The rule of law, judicial independence, and constitutional government are all hanging by a thread, and that thread could snap at any moment. Stay vigilant, stay informed, demand accountability from your representatives, and understand that we are living through history. The kind of history that people will study for centuries as either the moment when democracy was defended or the moment when it died. This story is far from over, and every single development matters.